Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first of our Talk Money Week webinars, which this morning is on the subject of Eat Well for Less, and it's being delivered by Jane McClenaghan from Vital Nutrition. Before we go on to the presentation, for those of you who don't know about the charity, I just want to briefly say something about the charity and what we do. So, Charity for Civil Servants, our vision is to be a supportive community where every civil servant or former civil servant has the chance to live their life to the full. And we offer a range of services and support. This can be online or offline, and both from ourselves and in partnership with a range of other specialist organisations. It's important to say that each service is dependent on your situation and eligibility. So we often check this through your national insurance number or through your payslip. If you're not sure if you're eligible or whether we can help, the best thing to do is to simply contact us and ask. We know life is not black and white, and neither is our offer of help. We look at everyone on a case-by-case basis. So in terms of who we can help, we help all civil servants, current, former or retired, and their dependents. And they can seek the charity's help at any time. So even if you leave the civil service, you're still eligible to come for us for help. And by dependents, we mean people who are financially dependent on you. Although the charity is funded by civil servants, you do not need to have donated in the past to apply for help. We're not a membership organisation. So just by being or having been a civil servant, you're eligible to seek assistance. So on that note, just one final thing. If you have got any questions during the presentation, if you want to pop them in the Q&A, you can ask questions anonymously if you prefer, and we will endeavour to answer them at the end of the session. So I will now hand over to Jane, who's going to talk about Eat Well for Less. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. It's all the Janes today. Thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. It's great to be back with you. And today's session, as Jane said, is really focusing on Eat Well for Less as part of your Talk Money Week. So I'm going to go through the body of the presentation, and then just as questions come into your head, just pop them into the Q&A, and we will have a really good opportunity at the end for lots of discussion, and I'll answer as many of your questions as I possibly can. So let me just share my screen with you first of all. I know that some of you have met me before at some of the other sessions that we've done. Oops, daisy, hang on. We're getting there. I know that some of you have met me at some of the other sessions I've done, but just as a little reminder, and maybe for those of you who haven't met me before, I am a nutritional therapist based here in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and we've been doing lots of these sessions with the Charity for Civil Servants over the last few months. So today's topic is very timely, and hopefully you're going to get lots of really useful information, not just about making your money go further when you're at the supermarket, but also making choices that maybe are going to serve you better and give you a little more nutrition. So I'm going to be sharing this screen, and also we're going to be going shopping. So we're going to share some supermarket screens as well, just to give you a little bit of an idea. The thing about this topic, and I say this every time I present this particular topic, is that we all have got our own techniques, I suppose, is the way, and our own ideas and tips of how we save money at the supermarket till. Sometimes it feels like every time you go to Lidl, Tesco's, Sainsbury's or Asda, wherever you shop, the receipt ends up being more and more and more and more expensive every time. So there's lots of ways that we can make changes and really be a little bit more savvy with the money that we are spending. But I really want to make sure that when we are spending our hard-earned pocket money on our food, that the food that we're getting is going to really nourish us and nurture us as much as possible. So hopefully you'll get lots of useful information out of this today. So the first thing is to have a plan. And really, when I'm talking about planning, yes, I'm talking about menu planning, but make it work for you. So I know lots of people who are really organised and have got a weekly plan. I know some people who have got a monthly plan where they have the 4 almost 4 weeks that they put on rotation. And I know other people who, for them, menu planning is just too much. It's too much of a commitment, and you just want to kind of wing it and see where you are. So whether you're a planner or whether most of the time you wing it, there are advantages to a little bit of planning. If we tend to eat at kind of on the go and just, as things come along, we do tend to spend more money. So the way that I think about planning is not necessarily planning a week in advance, because actually, who knows what you're going to be doing on Friday, never mind this time next week. So think about it 2, 3, or 4 days ahead. And that way you can factor in what you've got in your diary, what your plans are, where you're going to be, what you've already got in the cupboard, and it makes it much more manageable. Do it in bite-sized chunks, literally. Also, when we're planning, quite often we are focusing more on our evening meal, but don't forget to plan for breakfast, even if you have the same thing for breakfast every morning. Plan for lunch, and of course plan for those snacks. And if you plan, not only are you going to save some money at the supermarket till, but you're also much more likely to make better choices, make healthier choices, choose food that is more nutritious, rather than just getting to lunchtime and going, right, what am I going to eat? Because when it gets to lunchtime and you ask yourself, what am I going to eat? Often we are hungry and we'll just go for what's there, which is not always going to be the best choice. Whereas if you've planned, you might have made something like a super salad, you might have ingredients for your filled wholemeal pittas, you've maybe made a pot of soup, you've got something there that is really nutritious, really nourishing, and it's going to taste great. It's going to save you time, energy, effort, and of course, save you money as well. So my first hot tip is get planning, but plan 3 or 4 days in advance, not necessarily a week, unless that really suits you. And like I said, what suits one person is not necessarily going to suit somebody else. When you are planning, check what you've got. And this always makes me think about, one day I was doing this workshop with a community group here in Northern Ireland, and I was asking the group, when, do you plan, and where do you plan, and when do you plan? And there was a woman in the group, and she says, yes, I plan every week and I'm really organized. And I said, where do you do your planning? Do you do it as you're sitting in the kitchen? Or she said, no, I do it in the bus. And I said, how do you remember what's in your cupboard? She was very organized. She takes pictures of what's in her fridge so that she can plan around that. So if you're that organized, then great. But it's important, I think, to do your planning in the kitchen so that you can open the cupboard, open the freezer, open the fridge, and see what you have got there. And then plan your menu for the next 3 or 4 or 5 days around that. Plan your shopping around that. So if you've got maybe something like, if you've got something in your cupboard like a can of chickpeas, a can of tomato, and maybe there's some curry spices or curry paste in the cupboard, then it's obvious that curry is going to be on the menu this week. So just make sure that, and it also means then that you're using up the ingredients that you have spent your money on, and that they are going to be used on rotation, and that you're not going to get things that are going out of date. Usually things that are in your store cupboard are going to be non-perishable items, so things in tins or dried goods. But the stuff that's in the fridge, just check it. Just bring the stuff that has been there a little longer to the front of the fridge so that you can see it, so it's more in your eye line and that you're going to use that up, rather than getting to a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks later and finding something that you should have used, like half a block of feta quite often is the thing that is not used, or maybe half a pot of yogurt, whatever it might be. But use your things up, get creative with those store cupboard ingredients. And a really nice way to do this, actually, to kind of get more variety into your diet and get creative, is if you've got things in your cupboard that you're not that sure what you're going to do with them, then I would suggest that, say if you've got maybe, I don't know, half a packet of buckwheat or quinoa or something like that you bought for a recipe, but you haven't used the rest, go on to the BBC website, and they've got a great recipe finder in there. You just put the ingredient that you want the recipe for into the search, and it comes up with lots and lots of ideas for you. So make sure that you're using things up, check what you've got, and then do your planning around that. Make some swaps in your shop. So you've got to the stage where you've done your planning, you know what you've got, you know what you want to eat, and you've sort of done your menu planning around that. And from that menu plan, then you build your shopping list. So when you're doing that shopping list, I tend to use the notes page on my phone, to be honest, so that when something runs out, I stick it into the notes page there. And it means that you're not buying two of something and that you're also not going to run out necessarily. So use the notes page in your phone, but also think about what are you normally buying, and is there a way that you could be a little bit more savvy with it? So I'm just going to give you some ideas about this. So an example might be that you always buy things like your pasta sauces. So let me just come out of this and hang on. Oh, it's not letting me do this. So it might be that you always buy a pasta sauce, but what you might want to do, hang on, I can come out of this, and I want to share my other window. Where are we? Okay. So if you're buying something like your pasta sauce, you might want to go for something like passata. And this is just, I'm sure that lots of you do this anyway, but this is just your jar of sieved tomatoes, which you can get for £1 or a couple of pounds, 60p there it is on the left-hand side, the Sainsbury's own brand. And that with some herbs, with a little bit of garlic, a little bit of dried oregano. If you've got any frozen herbs, put them in there as well, plenty of garlic. That is going to be so much more economical than your pasta sauce. So if we look at this one here, this Sainsbury's passata, which is 60p, so £1.20 per kilo. And if we change this to, just to give you an idea, our pasta sauce, here we go. So actually this is not too bad. So just thinking about the amount that you're going to get for this. So you're bringing in, number one, you're eating something that is much less processed. And number two, you are bringing in more antioxidants and more variety into your diet. So really think about either going for the own brand stuff or using the passata and building your own herbs into that. So a comparison here with your 69p sauce to one of the, oh, that's the passata, sorry. But you know what I'm getting at. So go for your own brand. Go for the own brand rather than something that is the branded version, for example. That wasn't a good example, but you know what I mean. So always go for the own brand, and where you can, use the individual ingredients. Another example of this, of your savvy shops, can be things like your the different grains that you buy. So it might be that you always opt for things like rice and pasta. It might be when you're in that kind of the dried goods section that actually couscous is a little cheaper than the rice, for example, or that something like barley that you can put into soups and stews and that's lovely at this time of the year is going to be a different grain and something that's going to bulk things out, maybe as a difference from things like your lentils. The other example I was thinking here around the swaps in your shop, and this is a right, let me see, is something like if always on your menu during the week is something like your chicken breasts. This is going to be a better example because I've looked this one up before. Okay, so if you're looking for something like your chicken breast here, so we've got so it's £7.16 per kilo. Okay, if you swap that over to a whole chicken, it's almost, well, it's less than half price, and you're going to be able to use that, all of the bits in that. So you can use maybe the chicken breast for dinner, maybe the legs for as part of a lunch, and maybe then you can use the rest of the chicken in a soup. So you're using more, it's less processed, and therefore you're not paying for that processing. Another example I wanted to share with you was things like your cereals. So if you buy things like muesli and granola, again, going for something like an own brand version is going to be much better value. Not always necessarily healthier, but definitely much better value. So I just wanted to show you an example here where we've got the Jordans as an example at 39.7p per 100 grams compared to an essential granola, which is 19p per 100 grams. And what you could do to that, to add a little more nutrition into that, is if you've got things like some nuts and seeds, you could add that in there. You could have with things like your natural yogurt. Again, go for things like your own brand because it's going to be much, much better value. I also think in terms of when you are shopping, you will notice that I'm not looking at the unit price here. I'm looking at the price per 100 grams. And that means that you're comparing like with like. So when you're in the supermarket, make sure that you're looking at the shelf. I'm just going to go back into my screens again here. Make sure that you're looking at the shelf to the bit that you'll see the price of that item, and then underneath you will see the price per 100 grams or the price per 100 mils, for example. And that's how it's much easier to share like for like. Other really great swaps in your shop could be things like your frozen fruit and vegetables. At this time of the year, berries, for example, can be really expensive, whereas if you buy them frozen, you can get a great big bag for a couple of pounds. Often they're on 3 for 2 for offer, and your 3 for 2 offers on things like that you know that you're going to use that are non-perishable is a good idea. 3 for 2 and other things like maybe some of the fresh ingredients may not be such a good idea unless you know that you're going to use that. So swapping things like your cereals, maybe swapping over things like your branded or your kind of whole grain cereals like a granola, swapping it to something like overnight oats can also be great because it means that you're buying the individual ingredients, you're making it up yourself, much better value. Or again, make your own homemade granola with your oats, things like your nuts and seeds in there, maybe a little bit of cinnamon in with that, a little bit of olive oil and or a light olive oil or a light oil and a little maple syrup, and pop that into the oven for about 20 minutes and you've got a really gorgeous breakfast that's very affordable. I've got a couple of other ideas for that as well, which we will come back to shortly. But often we're going for things like when we're buying ingredients for lunches, we might go for bagged salads, things like rocket, watercress, spinach. Why not buy a whole cost lettuce, for example, or swap it up to something more seasonal, like some kale that could be shredded and put it into salads, or some red cabbage that could be shredded and put it into salads with things like grated carrot and a little bit of apple. Change things up with the seasons and you will save yourself some money. Okay, so check the price. So not just, remember, you're not checking the price per unit, you're checking the price per 100 grams or per 100 mils. One of the things that has really shot up in price recently, we always hear about coffee and chocolate, but the other thing that has really increased in price are the oils that we use in cooking. And if you tend to buy something like a Fry Light or a spray olive oil, that can work out quite expensive as well. So again, let me just show you our example here. We're going to go to Tesco's this time. So we've got here different types of olive oil. Remember, we're looking at the amount per 100 mils. So let's just skip down to our spray olive oil here, which is the Fry Light. And that works out at so it's £2.75 for a bottle, but it works out at £1.45 per 100 mils. So if we swap that to a bog standard regular Tesco olive oil, it's 62p per 100 mils. So you can see where your savings are there. Also, again, this is an example of the difference between your branded and your non-branded oils as well, or your non-branded foods. So just be careful about the pricing. Also bear in mind that if you're buying a larger quantity of something, that can also work out a little cheaper. So here we've got the 1 litre olive oil on the left hand side. The third one across, we've got the 500 mils. So it goes from 62p per 100 mils up to 92p per 100 mils. So just check that, keep a little eye on that price per 100 mils. Okay, check your price. Let me see, why is this not moving for me? Come on. Frozen versus fresh. I think quite often we think about healthy eating, we have these images of fresh produce and our trolley packed with colourful fruit and vegetables, which of course, absolutely, that is nutritious and very delicious. But sometimes adding some frozen fruit and vegetables into your shop can mean that you get much more variety, which is really good for your nutritional intake. And you just use what you need. You do not have any food waste. So it works out much more economical as well. This is particularly important if you're cooking for one or two, or if maybe you're eating more vegetables than somebody else in the house, for example. So, of course, we all know about things like frozen peas and broad beans, but check out the rest of the frozen food aisle, because you will also find things there like grains. For example, you know, you can get things like savoury rice, but you can also get things like whole grains with vegetables through them. You can get frozen herbs now, which means that, again, you're just using what you need and you have no food waste there. So really think about bringing some of those frozen vegetables, fruit and other foods onto your plate. One of the key things I think with frozen foods is go and have a little look at the sections that you don't normally. So go and look at things like frozen fish. It's not just fish fingers. You will find there fillets of cod, haddock, collie, salmon that will work out much cheaper than if you're buying the fresh. And again, you just use what you need. One of the things that I always have in the bottom of my freezer is a bag of prawns and a bag of edamame beans. And those can form a really good base for things like stir fries with lots of vegetables. And then using your, for your sauces, it could be things like soy sauce, a little bit of garlic, ginger, chili, and then some noodles or rice with that too. So really start thinking about the ingredients that you're buying and not always going for, I know it's really easy to go into the supermarket and just buy the same thing that we are used to, but start questioning your methods. Love your leftovers. I think it's brilliant to bulk cook and batch cook, and this is definitely the time of year to get into that. Autumn is when we want those one pot wonders. We want that warming, nourishing food. But you might not want to eat chili and rice 3 nights in a row. So you could do a big pot of your chili, have it with rice tonight, but maybe tomorrow make that into fajitas. Don't buy different wraps for your fajitas than you do for your lunch wraps. So buy something like a packet of wholemeal pita pockets or your regular wholemeal wraps out of the bread section in the supermarket and use the same wraps. You don't need to buy El Paso wraps for your fajitas and lunchtime wraps for your lunch. You don't need to do that. They're the same thing, really. So it could also be then that you have maybe some sweet potatoes that you stick into your air fryer or you put into the oven. If you're using your air fryer, that is also going to be much more economical because you're cooking for a shorter time. So think not just about what you're buying, but also how you're cooking that food. Using a microwave and using an air fryer do tend to be much more economical. Use your ingredients wisely. So this is the example that I was telling you at the start, where you're looking in the cupboard and you're going, there's 3 cans of chickpeas in there, there's a can of tomatoes, and there's some curry paste. Make sure that you're using everything up, that you're not coming home with another can of chickpeas, another can of tomatoes, and even more curry paste. So be kind of organized in terms of what's already there and how you can use it. Also, if you're buying things like fresh chilies and fresh ginger, don't just pop that in the bottom of the fridge whenever you're finished with it. Have a little bag or a box that you keep in your freezer for those ingredients. And then you can take them straight out of the freezer and use a really fine grater and grate it straight into the dishes that you're using. It means that that food is not going to waste. It's not going to be that when you go back to look for it a week later, it's maybe seen better days and it ends up in your compost bin. So use your ingredients wisely and also store your ingredients wisely. Think about how you cook. So this is where we're thinking about maybe using a microwave, using an air fryer, or using a steamer. Things that are going to be quick cook so that you're not leaving your oven on all day. A slow cooker is also much more economical than putting things in to cook long and slow in your oven. So your cooking methods can also add up to the end of the month or the end of the quarter electric bill. So keep that in mind too. Freeze what you don't use and make sure that you label it. So don't look into the cupboard, into the freezer and go, oh, I'll have that for dinner tonight. And you pull it out and it ends up being stewed apple, for example. So make sure that you put your labels on there and bring things forward. So things that maybe you have frozen 3 weeks ago, bring them to the front of the freezer so that you can see it and that you're eating things in rotation. So let's say you did your one pot wonder of your chili and you have it tonight with rice, tomorrow night as fajitas, and then you've got a portion or 2 or 3 or 4 left over for the freezer. It means that you're not necessarily eating that food 3 days in a row. It means that you're not throwing food out, but it also means there's a day next week or next month where you don't have to cook. So let's just kind of have a quick idea around 10 ways to save you some money at the supermarket till. Some of these I am sure that you already do and I'm sure that you thought about, but it's just to get you in that mindset around what are your habits? Do you do the same thing every time you're in the supermarket? Do you buy the same things all the time? Do you have the same routine? Could you shift it up a little bit? So first up, make your own granola, muesli or overnight oats. So buying the individual ingredients, and especially if you buy them from a budget supermarket like Aldi, Lidl or Asda, you can end up with a much more economical and probably tastier granola than you buy from the supermarket. Once you get used to this, once you get in the routine of it, it's really, really super simple. So all you need are some jumbo oats, nuts and seeds that you like, maybe some spices you could put in there, maybe a little bit of your cinnamon or ginger or mixed spice, for example. A little light olive oil or melted coconut oil works really good too. And then a little touch of maple syrup. There's lots of recipes for homemade granolas that you will find on my website. And of course, remember to check out the BBC website too. And overnight oats is super simple. It's brilliant for this time of the year because you could make up 2 or 3 portions and you can eat them hot or cold. I've got a really nice recipe for you for carrot cake overnight oats that's got some jumbo oats, grated carrot, some mixed spice, walnuts, chia seeds, and then some grated apple, and you just soak everything overnight in milk, and you can add some yogurt to that if you want to, or extra fruit if you want to in the morning. But it's really packed full of so much nutrition. It's got plenty of protein in there, and it's going to keep you feeling fuller all morning through. Make a lunch. If you're out at work and you're buying your lunch every day, it can end up being really expensive. So get into the habit once a week at this time of year of making a pot of soup and once a week making a super salad. Those 2 basics will really nourish you right through your working week. So it means that you don't have to think about your lunch every single day. It means that you're taking shortcuts, you're using up the ingredients that you have got, and you're probably eating things that are tastier and more nutritious than you would ordinarily. So your soup, if you made a pot of soup and that did you 2 or 3 days, you maybe have that with something like your filled wrap or wholemeal pita. Remember, you've got the wrap for something else this week. You might have it with maybe something like oat cakes and cheese, for example. It doesn't always have to be with bread. Bulk your soups out with things like beans and lentils that will make your vegetables go further, but they will give you more fiber and more protein to help you feel fuller for longer. Salads. Don't think cucumber, lettuce and tomato at this time of the year. Use the seasonal vegetables. So use things like finely shredded kale, broccoli, maybe a little bit of red cabbage. What about putting some carrot in there or some beetroot in with that? A little bit of apple or pear. What about if you had something like a handful of hazelnuts or walnuts in with that? And then maybe make a really nice dressing with something like your olive oil and apple cider vinegar, or maybe a little balsamic with that. And then serve that with your protein of choice. And the economical proteins might be some leftover meat, fish, or chicken. It might be that you bring in some tinned fish in with that, some tuna, but don't always choose tuna, because also, again, I've noticed that tuna prices have really rocketed. So have a look at things like mackerel, sardines, or perhaps if you prefer something vegetarian at lunchtime, then use something like a can of mixed beans, put a little dressing on that, and use that as your protein and your fiber in there, with something like your oat cakes and hummus, especially if you get into the habit of making your own hummus. Shop bought hummus is absolutely fine, but if you're really going for this, you might find it more economical to make your own. You might want to put things like feta into your lunch, but remember, something that's going to do you, get those ingredients that are going to work hard for you. So those same ingredients that you're putting in your seasonal salad for lunch, the kale, the beetroot, the carrot, the broccoli, for example, will make a really good ingredient as part of your dinner, your one pot wonders there too. Use different cuts of meat. So don't always just automatically head for things like the chicken breasts. Have a look at the price of a whole chicken, or have a look at something like maybe swapping over and going for some tinned fish. Maybe buying some frozen prawns instead of fresh prawns, for example. Maybe going for something that is completely meat-free, so that you're buying or you're using things that are maybe a little healthier, maybe with a more fibre in there, things like the beans and the lentils, maybe falafels, for example, and hummus can make a good part of your lunch, or a nice sort of almost a picky dinner. But really think about the cuts of meat you're using. For your evening meal, and especially at this time of the year, if you're doing those one pot dinners, then you can get away with things like slightly cheaper cuts of meat. You know, instead of buying maybe a steak for your stir fry, then buy beef chunks so that you're putting them in and you're slow cooked, and then bulking that out, putting things like butter beans in there, putting things like lentils in there, putting things like chickpeas in with your curry, so that you're making that meat go further. At least one meat-free main meal a week is going to save you money as well. Meat tends to be the most expensive ingredient on our plate. So it could be that you make up perhaps a dal, and again, you could have that for dinner tonight and perhaps leftover for lunch tomorrow, and maybe a portion for the freezer. You might do things like a chickpea curry instead of a chicken curry. You might go for things like using tofu in your stir fries instead of your regular meat in beef, for example. So really think about once or twice a week taking the meat out and really exploring some good vegetarian and vegan alternatives. Bulk out with pulses. So here's where we're using things like our beans and our lentils. So an example that I always do is, if I'm making a bolognese, I get some pui lentils, which are almost the little black ones, and I will cook those up. I buy the dried lentils, so cook a little cup of those up. Make the bolognese as I would ordinarily with a little minced steak, but then put the cooked lentils in with it as well, and it means that you're getting that whole pot is going to go much further. You can do it, of course, completely vegetarian with just the lentils. Chickpeas always in your curry. More kidney beans in your chili. So start thinking and getting savvy with those pulses as well, because they are so economical and they are so nutritious. But they've got protein and they are packed with fiber. Store cupboard shop. Have you got things in your store cupboard, in your larder, that are your go-tos, that you can make a meal in minutes? Even if it gets to the end of your week, the end of your menu plan, and you can sort of grab and go something. So if you've got some frozen vegetables, maybe you've got some tofu or frozen prawns or leftover chicken, maybe you've got a can of chickpeas, maybe you've got some tinned tomatoes, and some nice herbs in your spice rack, then you can start making things like really, really tasty one-pot wonders. It's also worth having in the fridge door or in the fridge somewhere. Go to, again, one of those budget supermarkets and stock up on things like olives, capers, sun-dried tomatoes, and roasted red peppers, because adding those into your regular meals, especially if you're cooking more Mediterranean foods, can just add so much more texture, so much more flavour, and yet you're not spending a lot of money on really expensive sauces. How we store food is important. So I mentioned there earlier to you about things like the ginger and the chili. So freeze it and grate it directly from frozen. But also if you're buying fresh herbs, for example, a little bag of fresh herbs, and you're not going to use all of them, then plunge them into a little jam jar of water with the stems down first, and they will last for about 10 days, couple of weeks almost. Just make sure that you refresh the water. Putting things in the right place in the fridge. So always putting your vegetables in the bottom of the fridge. Even buying, if you're buying your fruit and vegetables from the supermarket and they're in a bag, take them out of the bag so that they don't sweat in the bag, and put them in. So a bag of carrots, for example, empty the bag of carrots out, stick it in the bottom of the fridge. They will last longer. If you do buy the bagged salads, if you're using a little bit of that salad, don't just stick the bag straight back in the fridge again. Put the whatever you're not using into a Tupperware box, stick a lid on it, and put it in the fridge. That way it will last several days rather than just not even overnight almost. Sometimes it goes wilted really quickly. Oh, on that note as well, if you do have things like lettuce or soft greens that have gone a little bit soft and maybe have seen better days, plunge them into iced water and they will soon revive. Bake your own treats. So if you like baking, then why not on a Saturday or a Sunday, or if you've got a little bit of spare time, bake a tray of something like flapjacks or protein balls, or maybe even muffins, but make them a little bit healthier. Here you can use things like your frozen berries, of course, and you can put stuff like ground almonds in that, and you can even put stuff like flaxseed. There's loads of really great healthy recipes for treats like this. They are much more economical than buying things like protein bars or nut bars or seed bars or granola bars. You know exactly what's gone into them and you're saving yourself a lot of money. It's often those kind of foods that can be really expensive. If you've got fruit in the fruit bowl that you know that you're not going to use, then why not either chop it up and put it into a smoothie? If you're putting it in a smoothie from a nutritional point of view, I'd like to see some protein in there. So you could put some milk into it, you could put some yogurt in with it, and that's going to be really nice, slow release energy and going to keep you feeling fuller for longer. But you can also do stewed fruit or fruit compote. And all you do there is just chop your fruit up. Depending on how sweet it is, you probably do not need sugar for most fruit compotes. And again, you can bring your spices in there. So you can make something really interesting that you could have in your porridge or your overnight oats or with some yogurt. And instead of going for your Friday night takeaway or eating out, why not get your friends around and have a curry night in or a meal in? And if you're doing something like your curry night in, it's going to, number one, work out more economical. Number two, you probably have leftovers for tomorrow. And what's a really nice idea, if you are dining with friends, is just to share the load. So why not say, could you bring a salad? Could you bring a starter? Could you bring maybe a little bit of dessert? Or even something like some chocolate for afters. And then you do the main course. It's a real sociable way to cook, but also people like to bring things. So that's a nice way to think about it too. So there's lots and lots of ways that we can be a little bit more savvy in our shopping, that we can save ourselves some money at the supermarket. The one thing I didn't mention is also considering where you shop. So, you know, there's lots of online supermarket checkers, and while most of us don't have time to run from one supermarket to the other, it doesn't always pay to be loyal to one supermarket. So just check that you are getting the best deal that you can, and maybe switch your supermarket, because that can make a big difference in the bottom line at the checkout as well. So I am going to come out of this. Let me see if I have. Yep. And I'm hoping that there's lots of questions for us in the Q&A. So I'm going to pass back to Jane Goodwin, and she's going to help us with the questions then.
Thank you, Jane. There was lots and lots of useful information there. We have got a few questions that have come through. The first one was, planning sounds great, but once the food or snacks are in the house, I find it difficult not to eat it, especially when working at home around 3 in the afternoon. So have you got any tips to not kind of get through your well-planned food in advance of using it?
I think that is important, because actually when we're eating from home, and especially if your desk is actually your kitchen table and you're working in the kitchen, it can be really tempting. But again, that's where your planning can be very useful, because if you plan what those snacks are going to be, and maybe you've got things like fruit in the fruit bowl and a bag of nuts, for example, or you've got something like oatcakes and peanut butter, or you've got something like some yogurt in the fridge, or some dark chocolate, or maybe you've made up some of those healthy protein balls or bars that I was mentioning. It means that there is a go-to, but that also you're getting to that, you're thinking about what you're going to eat in that afternoon, and you're planning and you're prepping. I use this technique not just for this particular thinking about eating on a budget, but also thinking about if we want to improve our diet, that planning is so important. So I think make sure that you do put the snacks on your planning, but think about healthier snacks that you could bring in there too. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. Another person has said, I've noticed, and I think you've covered some of this, talking about adding pulses and things, but I've noticed over the last few months, meat has got really expensive, and some cuts have almost doubled in price. So do you have any advice for things that can be used as alternatives, but still providing what you need, and what will appeal to people who are members of the family who are meat eaters?
Yeah. So I think there it's just shopping around, looking at, instead of buying maybe the cut of meat that you would always go for, then look for something different. Change your menu with the season so that you are doing those long, slow cooked meals where you can use things like, the chump steak, for example, and doing things like that in your stews and your curries. And also maybe see how you go. And just that idea, what that got me thinking about was try that idea with the lentils. So let me just show you. When I'm doing bolognese, the lentils that I'm using are little pui lentils that are dried, and they look almost the same. They're not those ones, they're ready cooked, but they look almost the same as meat. So it means that your mince goes much further. So sometimes they are these ones.
Yep.
So you can cook a cup of that up and it'll bulk your bolognese out. And I promise you, most people will not even notice that you've added that in there. So it's making your meat go further, I think, is important too. So try that and see how that goes.
No, thank you. That's a really, really good tip. Anita has said, it's really a comment, but making your own pasta sauce is better than buying any, even if it is cheaper, because it will probably have less sugar and salt, because a lot of the shop bought sauces or the ready meals and everything are likely to be much more sugar and salt than you'd put in if you were cooking from scratch.
Yes, good point,
so
Anita.
they say they always look at the nutritional labels, because it's kind of balancing that budget thing with the health, healthy eating, isn't it? And
yes,
and they're trying to avoid too much of the processed stuff. Yeah,
that's good. Good point. Thank you, Anita.
And then somebody else has said, I struggle to decide on what to take to the office for lunch that doesn't need heating up, and they don't like it when they default to a shop sandwich. So are there any sort of tips for things you can take in for lunch that may not require sort of heating up and things?
Yeah, so maybe something like one of those super salads that I was telling you about, or I'm just again going to very quickly share my screen. So if I show you something like, me see if this is going to work. Yeah. So if you make up something like this, is not particularly seasonal, but you change the ingredients with this. Something like this, that you've got a pack of a ready cooked grain, like the quinoa or the whole grains, and put other bits and pieces into it. That will last you over 2 or 3 days, and it's really tasty. Or it could be that you've got your pack of wholemeal pittas with your fillings in them, or things like the super salads. So this again is another example of a salad that I would make up this time of year: beetroot, carrot, and orange. And with that, because it's already got things like your protein in it, but you can have things that with something like oat cakes. But if you make things like that up, that will do you 2 or 3 days. The other thing I would say is, I know what you mean about it's really hard to take something hot into the office. Have a look out for little food flasks. You can get brilliant little flasks you can put soups into. They're not expensive. And if you make your soup up and take it in with you, that's a good idea too.
That's a really good idea. Somebody else has said, do you recommend slow cooker dump bags?
Yes, I think they're a brilliant idea. So for those of you that don't know, I think my understanding of them is just yes, it's just basically chop everything up, and then you know all your vegetables, and you can put your meat in there and all the bits that you need, and your herbs and your spices and everything that you need, and that you're really well organized. And then you just stick those ingredients into the slow cooker. So yes, I think they are a great idea. Just be careful about putting raw meat in with that. So usually you would keep the meat separately, but I think they're absolutely brilliant. They're so handy. Yes.
Excellent. Another question from another Jane. That's 3 Janes.
Okay, great.
Can you freeze your own berries, fresh berries, to avoid waste? The texture of frozen berries bags always feels different to the fresh ones.
Yeah, when you freeze, because berries are so high in water, when they're frozen, the water crystals, if you think about when you freeze water and to make ice, it expands. So the same thing happens within the berries, and that's why they go mushy when you defrost them. So the same thing would happen if you froze your own fresh berries. So yes, you can freeze them, but they'll end up in that same texture, Jane, as when you're buying the frozen ones. What I tend to do is buy the frozen blueberries, because they're not quite, I know they're a completely different texture, but I don't mind them in things like porridge and yogurt and things like that. So yeah, it will be the same texture if you freeze your own.
Okay. Another question from Sarah was, how can we structure our shopping when we may need to go to multiple shops for availability, cheaper prices of certain goods? So to get the best deals on everything, it does mean going to lots of different places, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I think it's get those store cupboard essentials in bulk, and maybe do that one bulk shop wherever you know you're going to get those bits and pieces cheaper, and do that maybe once a month, so you've got those store cupboard ingredients, and then shop around it. And sometimes it can also work out better shopping a couple of times a week instead of shopping once a week, so you're just buying what you need and you have much less food waste. I know we don't have any time, but it's really thinking about planning, and it might be something like click and collect could be an idea there.
Okay, thank you. And then final question is, do you need to cook the dry pre-lentils first before adding them to bolognese? Because often you have to cook lentils for a while, don't you? So
yes, you do need to cook them. So what I tend to do is have a cup, rinse the lentils up, a cup of lentils, put it into a sieve and run lots of cold water over it. So you rinse the lentils first of all, and then put them into a pot. So if it's 1 cup of lentils, 2, depends what type of lentils you're cooking, but 2 cups or 3 cups of water. Cook it up for about 20 minutes, and those dried lentils then should be cooked. So I tend to do that at the start, then I chop up all my veggies, get the bolognese made, and then add the lentils into the bolognese. Otherwise they don't go soft enough usually.
Okay, thank you. That's the end of the questions. Just before we finish, I will just to finish up. Okay, it's really just to say this webinar has been the first webinar in our series for Talk Money Week. So if you're interested in any of the other webinars that we're running, You can register for the webinars through our website, and that's under the help and advice section. There's a section called webinars. They're all available there, and also recordings of the webinars that we're running will be available as well, apart from the webinar from GamCare on gambling harm. There won't be a recording for that. You can also access the webinar page using the QR code on the slide. So thank you very much, Jane. That was hopefully a really helpful, informative webinar for people. If you do want to find out more about the Charity for Civil Servants, then please visit our website, which is cfcs.org.uk, where you can find lots more information about the help that the charity offers, and also access lots of useful resources, either regards to money or also wellbeing, caring, and the financial assistance that we can offer. So thank you very much, Jane. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you found it useful, and hopefully we'll see you at another one of our Talk Money webinars. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.